Good evening. Thank you all for joining us tonight for the third edition of Collections 101. We're so excited to have you here. My name is Faith, and I will be the moderator of tonight's panel. We have a ton in store for you, so I'm just going to get started and dive right in. So just a brief introduction. My name is Faith, and I am a community manager at Google+. Specifically, I manage the collections community. So we are the community that has organized today's panel. If you've not heard of it yet, the collections community is a place on Google+, where you can come to meet other like-minded creators. You can share your collections that you create. You can find inspiration and learn how to build great collections through events like this. And you can also receive direct support and feedback from not just other members in the community like Noble and David, who are our panelists tonight, but also from the Google+ team directly. And also from our moderators, Nina and Aslan, who may or may not be in our little live chat tonight. So we'll share this content with you afterwards. If you've not checked out the community before, we really hope you do, because more great things are in store there, like the rest of our panel today. So a little overview for what you can expect from tonight. I'm going to kick us off with a quick introduction of our panelists, and then we're going to dive right into their content. So we'll start with Noble, and then we'll have David speak, and then at the end we'll have an open section for questions. So you'll notice on our live hangout there is a chat area, which I see everyone is making use of. So feel free to ask any questions you have there for our panelists. They may or may not see it while they're speaking, and if not, they'll definitely address it at the end in our question section. So please make use of that, ask a ton of questions. We're so excited to have you here. So let's go ahead and get started. I'm really excited to introduce our first panelist, Noble Ackerson. So Noble is a wearer of many hats, product executive, speaker, startup founder. He also speaks extensively at conferences. So Noble's really knowledgeable and experienced in all these online hangouts, but also in the tech world. He shares a lot of content, not just on Google+, but around the web. You may see him about ubiquitous computing, connected vehicles, and other techie things. If you have not checked out his collections yet, you definitely should. They will definitely keep you plugged into all your tech needs. Our second panelist is David. David is an author, speaker, and an analyst. So I think it's a common trend with our panelists. They tend to wear a ton of hats and do multiple jobs. So David does that too. He works with a lot of Fortune 500 companies, basically telling them how to run their social media presence, everything from search to data mining. And he's just crazy high energy and has a ton of experience with social media and building an online presence. So I'm really excited for what both Noble and David have in store for us today, and I'm just gonna hand it over right away to Noble.
Thank you so much, Faith, and thanks for all of you who are tuning in, and anyone else who will be viewing this at a later time, available on YouTube. Also, thanks to my co-panelist, Mr. David Amerland. He's actually one of the smartest, most impressive people that I've met recently on Google+. So you guys are in store for some really awesome stuff. So thank you all around, Google and everyone. I really appreciate the honor. It's an honor, I should say. All right, so we're going to be jumping right into it. I'm going to be talking about something I call the engagement loop. It's basically my little, I wouldn't even call it a framework, but it's my little approach to consistently posting. If you've ever seen any of my content, consistently creating content or resharing content to certain collections that I own. And I look at it as a loop, right? I'm curating ideas, hopefully my passions through Google+, and that's actually enabling me to further nurture those ideas and creating more consistent content, whether adjacent to Google Plus or not, or whether I'm speaking at another audience and just feeding all those topics back into the respective collections on Google Plus. And then finally rewarding the audience by re-engaging with them, and of course rewarding myself, because I have my own end game, and yours might be different from mine. So just sort of keep that in mind when we're going. So I look at the engagement loop as sort of like a journey to Middle Earth, right? You know, you have no idea what's happening in the beginning. You have a spark of an idea. By the middle, you're just trying not to lose the ring. I'm trying to keep this metaphor going. And then at the end, we all know, we all seen the Lord of the Rings movies because they never end. The ending is never the ending because it sets up a new beginning, sets up a new spark, and then a new story begins. So it's a virtuous cycle, as it were. But before we get into that, I want to talk a little bit about myself, or at least my approach to collections, right? How do I say this? I guess I generally respect that people could be viewing David's content, and I'd rather them view my content. So my content has to be unique to something that I'm passionate about, and I really appreciate and respect that the audience want to consume my content. Nothing against David's. David's stuff is awesome too. But I'm paying very close attention to my audience, making sure that, you know, I at least post at least once a week, and I'm consistent at the end of the day. So it's a combination of being passionate about something and being able to sort of continue it. So this is actually how I get that done, right? I'm gonna start with an example, a collection that to me is just amazing. I found this collection, I want to say, actually, it may have been through one of the Google Create promotions or just random Lego thing that I saw in my feed. It's by the authors and the photographer is called Tyne Tran, and she is just amazing. If you haven't seen these Lego photography art pieces, definitely check out her profile. If I remember to, I'll try to sort of link that on my profile if you want to sort of check that out. She does some amazing things, and we're all geeks probably. I know I am, and I love Star Wars stuff, and she turns Legos into Star Wars characters. Who doesn't love that? And she puts them in like real settings, and they're just adorable and amazing. And so I'm sort of just sort of paying attention to that, and I'm always re-engaged with her content because, you know, she also sort of rewards me by sort of plus oneing a comment that I might make, and of course respond to a compliment that I might make, or ask her how she got that shot, and she would actually let me know how she did it. So that's certainly my way of doing that. And so when you're thinking about your idea, so next slide. So so when you're thinking about your idea, you have to think about whether your idea has an audience, whether your idea actually meets the needs of a set of rabid Lego fans like me, that will definitely come back to see the next photo that you take, you know, at the beach with, you know, looking like Finn. But it's just Legos that's been painted, and it's amazing. And so you have to think about those things, and it's a good practice to check out other Google Plus communities when you're doing these things, when you're sort of thinking through your idea, to identify who you want to target, and then, of course, highly engaged collections of Google Plus. On Google Plus, we tend to sort of gravitate towards the geeky type content, and so you're not, of course, not constrained to that. but thoughtful type content is also interesting. They normally get very high engagement if you think through that. But you know, just don't be constrained by what everyone else is doing. Definitely be original, and that certainly helps. So with this example, with Tyne's example, if you want to be the next person to sort of get my attention, I would say, you know, you've asked yourself, does your idea have an audience? Well, you found me at the wearables community or the connected self-driving Tesla community. You definitely want to find the best time that I engage with your content, and you want to know where I am. So for example, I'm into fitness. You'll probably see me on one of the various fitness communities. I believe David is involved. The other panelist, David, is involved in one of the largest fitness communities on Google+. So you'll probably find me there. Probably not posting as much because it's just way too large. So yeah, all in all, just find the best time, and then, you know, try to figure out where your users are, and then post there. Just don't spam them. So you've identified where the users are. You know what time they're going to be engaged more of. You shouldn't just sort of stick to that. Just post. You have an idea to add to your collection. Just put it there. But you want to do that in order to get a cadence, a certain you know, a rhythm with when you post and how you post and what you post. So think about how your content can be sustained. Understand that, you know, consistency with interesting content is what brings your users back. Feed that beast, right? And so I'll give you an example with Wearables Weekly, where a couple of Google Glass holes, people who purchased Google Glass, like me, who were rabid fans about the device, came together and started to hang out on air about wearables generally, because Glass was a wearable, and we love wearables. And so we started talking about this thing, and of course, it died down. We had kids, and we had, you know, life went on, and I decided to feed that beast. I decided to continue it once collections got announced. And today it's one of my second highest engaging or highest followed, certainly the first highest engaging collection and the second highest followed collection on Google, as far as my collections are concerned. I should clarify. So you've done that. Now let's sort of move on this journey that we're taking. We're at Middle Earth now. We just met Smeagol, and we're trying to figure out what to do next. Now it's time to sort of find our groove. I tend to try to keep things fresh. So that means I'm not just using the typical text and photos and maybe a YouTube link depending on the collection, I should say. But I'm sort of creating original content. So far it's sort of bombed because I took a stab at doing live videos for under 3 minutes, which in retrospect sounds like a terrible idea because no one's going to know that I'm starting a live video, and when they do find out, it's over. So yeah, I make very smart decisions, as you can see, but you know, just I have the mic here, so just listen to me. And so use your collections as this vehicle to explore interesting ways to present your interests. So definitely don't do 3-minute quick hit videos on YouTube unless you have a strategy to, you know, surface it. And once I come out with mine, it will be a hit, and I'll be the next Marquez Brownlee or whatever. So yeah, Middle Earth, right? We're in the middle of this deal. You're finding your groove. So this is what you do. So you're trying to figure out if other formats work for your content. You got to be experimental. You have to create content. Most importantly, don't just sort of auto post something from another social network or another service without formatting or making it native to the Google Plus experience. You want to create content that adds value. and not just sort of just this one hit. Because over time, people just don't find any meat behind it. There's no passion behind it. It's just a bot. And once humans discover something is not human behind it, we tend to sort of poke it around like a Boston Dynamics robot. So let's not do that. All right, so now we get into reward. And I'll tell you a little bit, I'll spend this slide to tell you a little bit about my approach, my end game. I'm very selfish when it comes to my social media strategy. It's not intentional. I just want my time that I invest in social media into my collections to be worth it. And so I want to make sure that, you know, when I post something, I'm stirring up the pot and being polite while I'm doing it. I'm keeping things interesting, and I'm rewarding my users by +1ing them. If they reshare my content, I'm stalking them. I'm going out to their content and +1ing that same post that I posted so that I can let them know that I appreciate them and I'm right there with them, you know. So yeah, my personal end game, I promise you I'll tell you a little quick anecdote. So it all starts with an idea of, or an opinion with me. And then I post that content to Google+. If it takes off, or if it's controversial and it engages comments, if it's a poll or something, I start to weigh whether this should be a longer form post or maybe a video. If that takes off, so on some other platforms, you know, my blog post might get published and it might get picked up by someone, and I'll use that as an abstract that I submit to some local event to go have a speaking engagement, or I get invited by the Create community on Google Plus to come speak to you guys, right? So that's my end game. Like I put in a lot of effort to curate my content, so that reward to me keeps fueling more content for me, and that may not work for you, and I understand that. It may just be the gratification of helping someone, or that connection that you make with someone else. So just figure out your end game, help it fuel your new beginnings, and reward your users in the same way, and that might also bring something. So we're almost at the end of my presentation here, but when you want to engage your customers, your audience, you want to remember to be part of that conversation. Like I said, I'm stalking my users. I'm going over, if someone reshares my content and it's public, I'm going over to that reshared content and +1 it like I've never seen it before, you know, but I'm not spamming them. I'm not trying to sell. I'm not trying to, everything is just, you know, a gift, right? At least from my standpoint, and it works, at least for me. And so that's pretty much it. Let's just sort of sum this up. You can only sustain, nurture your collection with quality content if you have some level of passion around the content or topic, or at least you know what you're talking about. You can't just I can't start talking about neuroscience if I have no idea. I can't start a collection about neuroscience if I have no idea what I'm talking about, right? People sort of catch on really quickly and won't come back. And I understand that my audience can be following a ton of other collections out there because we share a common passion. So when I go out to I follow them when they are highly engaged with me, and I make sure to reshare their content to my collections, because it doesn't have to be just my own original content in my collections. And, you know, in doing so, your commitment to consistent content and how you speak to your audience is also a reward. And I'm just going to leave you with that. So in regards to how you speak and your voice and your tone, I'm going to just sort of hand it off to David. And he's going to give you a little bit more about that.
Noble, that's great. Thank you for that. If we go to the next slide. Okay, I think in what Noble covered just now, we have quite a few questions which probably started coming up in terms of what you are doing if you're new to collections. And we are in a digital space right now discussing how to create narratives and how to be us and how to be real. And it feels really weird because we are itemizing things and we are compartmentalizing them. We're trying to quantify what we do, and it feels very artificial. And I'm going to tell you that the best end game, pretty much like what Noble said, is to be you, to be real. And it sounds like a contradiction in terms, and it's not. So let me preface this a little bit. A lot of the stuff which we're going to cover today, I usually cover with corporate teams, and they have the same kind of dilemmas. They face the same kind of contradictions. They're trying to use techniques and artificial sort of constructs to create authenticity. And if this sounds a little bit contradictory, think the way we work in the offline world, where we basically construct a lot of the things which we do, and they're purposeful. And you understand that we do those things almost instinctively because we're so good at them. When it comes to the digital medium, however, we still have to learn things, and we still have to learn what actually works and what actually doesn't. And this is exactly what we're covering today. So we're going to talk about tone and voice. And these are technical terms, so I'm going to break them down. So if we go into the next slide, please. We are basically going to learn how to be ourselves and how to connect with the audience. Now, essentially, in order for something to be sustainable, it has to be low energy. So although we're learning techniques, if we don't make it part of who we are, if we try to be artificial in terms of projecting things, there's going to be quite a little bit of a struggle. It will take a lot of effort, and it's going to fail eventually in the long run because it is not sustainable. So the first thing to ask when it comes to creating a collection is, what's your natural style of communication? What kind of audience are you looking for? Why are you doing it? We are all intentional, especially in the digital medium, because we're here by choice. So essentially, when you do something, it has to be something which fulfills an aspect of who you are, and by definition, an aspect of your expected audience. Now, in the next slide, we'll see a little bit about what voice and tone do, and I'm going to explain with examples as we move forward. But essentially, what we're doing digitally is creating an identity. Now, we can get very deep here in terms of identity and how that is created, but in the digital space, everything is intentional. Essentially, we're constructing things from zero, which means that, yes, in one respect, we can be very artificial, but it's not sustainable. So we really need to identify what it is that is us and how to project it. And that is basically the challenge. Now, when we use voice, in terms of voice, it's essentially the elements of ourselves that make us recognizable primarily to our friends and family, and then to our audience. So when we do things in digital space, you need to think, what aspects of your personality are you going to bring into the space itself, and also how are you going to do it? Because bear in mind that you're constrained by the medium. You have usually words, text, and pictures to play with, and there's no usually vocal communication. There's no visual picture. A lot of the signals which we use to be ourselves are non-verbal ones, so we really need to think hard about it. Tone is essentially how we frame things in order to make the audience feel something, and that comes from us. So essentially, if you think that voice is elements of your identity, and tone is emotional aspects of what you say and how you say it in a particular space and time. Now, in the next slide, we're going to see that it takes time to develop voice because it can't be done all at once. It is always a challenge to project who you are in one post. It's just impossible to do. So you've got to think that your identity is something which comes through over a number of posts usually, which is why collections are so valuable. And also within that context, within that frame, you're creating a relationship with the people who actually follow a collection, who interact and engage with the posts. And that relationship allows them to get to know you, which is why your voice is so important. Now, the tone is established immediately. Essentially, when you use tone, you're telling somebody how to feel in relation to a particular item of information that you're actually posting. And that can be very serious, it can be very lighthearted, but it is always there. As a takeaway on this, you always need to decide what is the long-term aim of your collection, what is it there to do, essentially, and how is it going to affect the people who are going to consume it. Now, I'm going to give you an example drawing from one of my most serious collections, which is Benny, who's a recent addition to my family, and is my dog. You know, and obviously, you got to think here, okay, why am I doing this? I mean, obviously, I could say that I think Benny's a fantastic dog, and he is, because he's my dog, and I want to share that with you. But I'm also doing it because by sharing this, I project part of my personality and part of who I am, which I can't do with other content. Usually the content I share with my audience is highly technical. I analyze data, and I talk about AI, and I talk about search, and I talk about the social media dynamic. And these are fairly constrained elements. When I talk in depth about those things, there's not a lot of room to be lighthearted and playful. And none of us are monolateral in our lives. We all have multiple dimensions that make up us in what we are. And having a collection about Benny certainly decompresses me at the end of a pressured day, but it's also something fun which I share with people who follow me anyway, and it becomes part of the ongoing conversation in a very light-hearted way. So it allows me to see who they are, and also it allows them to see who I am. Now, when it comes to how you build these things up, the little things, the technicalities, and Noble has already spoken about this in terms of the native G+ environment and how it feels, these things become important. You can see here, for instance, that the headings I use are very important because they're in bold, they frame what it is, and then the introduction shows the relevance of the post and its context. Now, both the heading and the introduction become the bridging point with your audience that allows them to either interact and engage with the collection at a deeper level because they comment, or simply to acknowledge it by perhaps +1ing, scanning it a little bit, and moving away from the post. If we look at the next slide, we can see here how I framed this, for instance. And this is a post I put up last Friday with a picture of Benny with his dinosaur. And I framed it in a sort of narrative, which was very playful because he sort of saved the earth and made the weekend safe for all of us. And who wouldn't want that, right? Because the weekend was coming up. But essentially, the takeaway from this is that the framing, the post, the heading, the introduction, all those things, they do very specific things for the reader. They determine the value of the post that you're putting together, and also they define the intent. And here, obviously, I'm not being serious at all. My intent is to be very lighthearted and connect with the audience at that level. And we use technical terms here like audience, but at the end of the day, we're talking about people. So if those things are not intentional, so we can project the human element of who we are, then we miss the opportunity to connect with people, and that's where in that connection, that's where the magic happens. In the next slide, I'm going to see that essentially it's a continuation of that previous post. And you can see here that there has been engagement with it, and people are essentially responding. And there are two very specific elements which come up here, and we're going to get a little bit more granular. So essentially, there are people whom I have connected with or in some way engaged with in the past, and I kind of know them and they're friends, and they plus mention me because they are talking to me directly. And then you can see also somebody has commented on that, and that's a brand new person to me. I've never met that person before. I haven't seen them comment in one of my posts before, and there's their comments. So basically they connected with Benny, and it is quite a fun one. And it shows that they're very human in the way they interact. Now, essentially, this is the magic of doing things like this when it's a lighthearted collection, but also you can do the same approach in terms of how you frame it, how you explain it in something which is a lot heavier, and we're going to see examples of that in a minute. So the importance is that if you do it, it allows that frame of your personality to begin to seep through, and it is that essentially people respond to. Now, we're going to get a little bit more technical on these things here, but essentially it's all about humanity. But let's see how it gets broken down. Now, your voice which is what you say, determines who you are eventually. It begins to put things together. It helps define the values that you stand for, because people begin to understand what's important to you, where your red lines are, where do you draw the line on certain things. It establishes any cultural ties you have with your audience. And the collection I shared with Benny is a classic example of this. If you think about it, if I was based in Egypt and my audience was predominantly Egyptian people around me, the lighthearted approach of sharing a collection about my dog when there are deeper, more existential issues would perhaps be the entirely wrong note to strike, because it would be very frivolous and very sort of self-centered. And this is not really what you want to do with these things. You try to actually be human and connect. And this is, the cultural ties established with my audience with a Benny Connect collection is primarily a first world sort of audience, because we can all understand the importance of our pets and the amount of effort that we put there, and how we sort of anthropomorphize them and ascribe sort of almost human qualities to them. And that's how you create this commonality with that audience, and how you project who you are in terms of a person, the humanity of it. Or if you don't, the lack of, which would work against the connection you're trying to establish. Each time how you say things, of course, establishes other things. Establishes the perception of what it is in terms of our connection, and also whatever inherent biases you bring to the table. And we all have very specific biases which resonate with the audience in turn. If we go to the next slide. Okay, so basically, by having the right kind of introduction, the right kind of style, this is what we actually achieve. We avoid echo chambers, so we don't want to sort of just talk to ourselves or talk to people who sound exactly like us, because that's a little bit self-defeating. We avoid getting stuck into filter bubbles where basically all our perceptions get thrown back at us. We create consistency, and Noble talked about that. And then we create a very human element, which makes it very sustainable, because it becomes essentially who we are, and it drives the narrative forward. Next slide, please. Great. And here we can see now some choices, and I've got two collections here. One which I follow, and obviously the Benny one. You can see here that I shared the fact that Benny lost a tooth, and it's a very conscious effort in terms of what I did and how I structured it. You can see in the picture itself that I used one of his antlers, which is a toy, next to his tooth for scale. But when you actually read it in the first instance, you see Benny lost a tooth, and your eye goes on the antler, and you think that I've got a baby saber-toothed tiger living with me. And I don't. But again, this is a very conscious choice on my part in how to put everything together. And in effect, when we do these things, we work almost like journalists. Everything we do has to have a message, it has to have a purpose, and it is crafted to stop the eye and make people think about it. And that's exactly what I did. Now, there's also a collection which I follow, which is on neuroscience by Corina Marinescu. And she doesn't actually feel that she knows enough about the subject to constantly introduce things. And she takes what I would say easy way out, but it isn't actually. It's very, very well thought through, where she uses a heading which is usually straight from the article, or it's a little bit paraphrasing the article, and then she copies and pastes one or two paragraphs from the article itself, which allow the collection and the post to actually be projected in the right way. Again, we can see the same style here in terms of journalism, how it affects the audience in terms of the choice of heading, the introduction has gone there. And again, it's the same two collections, but different posts. You can see how Corina is extremely consistent in what she does. And the value of that to the audience on a subject which is very complex is that the moment she actually looks at it, the moment you look at it, you make a quick assessment of how important it is to you, and you choose to engage. And with Benny, I used a very cute picture of him because he's sleeping with his panda, and I sort of juxtaposed it with a heading which described that in one of my own posts, introductions, on how I felt about it when I was sleepless, essentially. Okay, next post, please. Next slide. Great. So essentially, the takeaway from all this is that if you choose this kind of level of granularity, what comes across is your personality, because it's the only way to make it sustainable. It's your personality that allows the audience to feel about what you actually post and what your collections are about, and it is the feeling that they actually get from all this that allows them to connect with you. So through all these elements, which are admittedly artificial, definitely thought through in terms of and intentional of how they are used, we managed to project the very human nature of who we are. And I think on that note, we can go into perhaps comments now and see how we are going to have any questions.
Yeah, thank you so much, David and Noble. That was amazing. You covered so much information, so much content. So I want to acknowledge that really quickly before we move on to the question. So big thank you. So we did get a good amount of questions. I'm going to start with a question from William. So his question for tonight is, when you have a lot of collections, how can you share each week to them without overdoing it and causing followers to leave? So maybe Noble and then David, if you could let us know your thoughts on that.
So the question is, how do we not overwhelm the audience?
Mm-hmm.
Well, one, my approach is to make sure that I generally don't have that problem because I just don't have that much time. And so as something comes across, if there's a breaking news item, as in, Oculus, launches a new, device or something like that, that is sort of something that I capture, and I almost treat that collection as a bookmark at that time. So it's just sort of just capturing my thought in time about that. And so the audience generally, the readers of said collection generally respect that and expect that, just to hear a quick take, and then we sort of just blow it out in the comments and go back and forth in that. But as far as sort of how fearing, I've never really run into a situation where I've gotten that feedback that I'm just posting too much, because I just don't even have the time to post too much. So, David, what do you think?
Well, I think definitely it's a challenge, and there are two or three ways to address this. Now, the easiest way to think about this is a narrative, and Noble talked about in his presentation how to create a narrative from what we actually put together. So if it has a rhythm to it, if what you're sharing is of value to the audience, it really doesn't matter if you have 5 or 6 posts in one day, because they are real value and they begin to appreciate it. So it's not an issue. Now, if you have a lot of collections and you're posting a lot of things, well, the audience for each collection is different and separate. There may be an overlap, but that's by choice rather than design. So you're not really overwhelming your audience as such, unless they're following you also as a person. Let's say everybody sees all your posts, which doesn't always happen, and they can always unfollow you. So, if that's an objection to them. What I will say is that there's always a tendency sometimes to think, okay, how much is too much? And for that, I will use my own collection of Benny as an example. Now, because it's my dog, I take hundreds of pictures every day. It would have been very easy for me, because I think they're all cute, to simply share 10, 20, 30 of them every day. And that would definitely be oversharing. So by creating a narrative usually around each one, I avoid that issue by making sure that I frame it in a way that is lighthearted for the audience, which means I have to do a lot of work for it. And in order for me to do work, I have to think it's a real value in terms of the cuteness factor, perhaps. But by creating that kind of process where I need to input work, then it gives a real value in terms of what I do. And that also creates a rhythm, which allows the instant oversharing of 20 or 30 Benny pictures a day, which would definitely be too much.
So a good follow-up question to that is that, Noble, you talked about keeping your content organic and not robotic. And I know some people use third-party services to schedule their content and automate that. So what are your personal thoughts, Noble, David, on do you use anything like that? Would you recommend it to your to our audience?
I've got maybe half a dozen collections that I actively post to often, multiple times sometimes multiple times a day. And I have a cadence, unless there's maybe E3 going on, or maybe the Apple Dev event or Google I/O going on, where more than likely I would be posting multiple times in a day. But I am generally not a fan of sort of using schedulers, mostly because I'm not in the sort of the social media marketing space. I don't, the same with other services. I don't use sort of third-party services to sort of tools to sort of schedule my tweets, for example, TweetDeck or some other tools like that. I just want to sort of live in the, I generally have a rule to sort of live natively within whatever medium that I'm in, and that works for me. You won't find me, linking a tweet either, which takes that to a whole nother level. If I'm posting a tweet on Twitter, it lives on Twitter. If I want to reshare maybe that image on Google Plus, I will save that image if it's not already saved and post it natively on Google Plus, and I will format it as David sort of showed, in a way that I know that works, that gets people to actually read the content, to actually act on the call to action that I may have, which is, hey, what do you think? That might be bold or italicized or both, in order to sort of pull and get more engagement in the comments or get more reshares, whatever that end goal is.
Okay, I mean, that's a really good answer that Noble gave. And certainly we live in a world where automation tools abound, and there's always a huge temptation to use them. When it comes to that, there are two things to take into account. One is a technical aspect. If you're sharing content in Google Plus simply because you want to gain traction in search, perhaps, and you're doing things for a brand-related purpose, you need to bear in mind that the automated sharing channel is actually read by Google, and it's slightly deprecated. So essentially, the value of what you're doing in an automated way is slightly less than the value of what you do in a real way, pretty much like anything else you do in the real world. Now, if you have your secretary each year, look up the birthday of your best friend and send them a present instead of you doing something personally, the value of that is a lot less. The other thing is that by actually working a little bit more to create the heading, which is the content, the framing, and the introduction, which is the context of posts, certainly within Google+, we raise the bar in terms of value to the audience because we're being a little bit more thoughtful, which means the connection is a little bit nearer, and that creates a greater degree of authenticity, which resonates deeper with the audience and elicits usually a better response. So if you really want to have engagement, which I strongly recommend because these are social signals which again Google can see, and they have an impact on search, they have an impact on branding, they have an impact on authority and trust, then you need to work for it. There's no real shortcut. I appreciate the temptation that people have in terms of using these things, and also the challenge because there are not enough hours in a day. So you need to make a judgment call of what's really important to you. If you really want the human connection, the relationships, then you have to do it in real time, and you have to do it yourself. If all you want is a quick payoff in terms of search, and you're not really too fast about how important that post is, you just want it to be indexed, well, automation is the way to go.
So on that note, another question we got from Jeff is regarding how businesses can leverage collections to project a personal presence. So I know you have a lot of expertise with that, David. You mind kicking us off to answer?
Yes, certainly. We live in an era where we expect businesses to behave almost like individuals. We need to understand who they are and what they do in terms of their identity. We need to be able to establish their values. We need to be able to establish the commonalities they have with the audience, because that moves the needle in terms of what a business does, whether it's sales or whatever else it is. So essentially, a collection is part of this identity building process. It stands for all those things in a very granular, incremental process that takes time to build with the audience. So you need to think of a collection from a business point of view as a touch point with your audience, which allows to establish commonalities, values, shared ideology perhaps, and what's important in terms of what the business does. And if you do that, then it succeeds in terms of branding, and through branding you get incremental market share, and through market share you get sales.
That's a very good answer. I mean, I would add on, it all depends on your business, the type of tone, to echo what David presented earlier, that you want to sort of have across, and sort of ask yourself, the fundamentals of sort of your focus and your strategy as a whole. What are you trying to communicate across, and who are you targeting? Are they on how are you going to find them through your medium? I know there's a great example of a company that uses collections quite effectively, and that's, I think, Ford Europe. Robert Wallace, shout out to him, definitely uses that quite effectively. One of my mentees also yesterday we had a long conversation about how he uses his collections for SEO management and all that stuff. So you want to understand what type of content you're trying to curate through the medium, who you're targeting, what you want them to do after they see it. I think is important, and why they should care about your content. And once you sort of have that, your business, so you probably might want to know other things like how do you know if they've sort of followed through with that call to action? So on the back end of whatever you're linking to, have a way to measure success, and make it worth your while. Have your end game, I guess, sort of bringing it full circle. Have your end game be sort of a way to sort of have an ROI for the efforts that you're putting on through Google Plus.
So more questions, since we're on the topic of Google Plus and how it applies to corporate or business applications. So Justine asked for a few tips on keeping up sharing and best methods for raising the numbers of followers for her brand accounts.
It's not easy. It's not sort of a switch and boom, you have it. It's a grind. It is almost, definitely the first step is to watch this video again, this live stream again, because between David and I think, and even the previous collection 101s, they cover a lot of good content regarding how to create an audience, to gain an audience from your body of work through collections. It is a grind. It is consistent. You have to have something that is authentic, that you're passionate about, that you can clearly communicate in hopefully a well-formatted way. You have to nurture that content. You have to engage with your customers. You have to have your own sort of reward mechanism that feeds you to get to the beginning and do it all over again, either with the same collection or a new one. After a while, I mean, your audience will notice that you are, doing a great job, or you are providing quality content to them, and they will show up and they will reshare your content, which as a result will create, get you more people, viewing your content and hopefully following you.
Definitely. It's what Noble said. It's not easy. You need to remember that people like doing business with people. When it comes to a brand, we need to have a sense of its humanity behind it, at least its identity and its values. It's an incremental process. Think about the kind of content which you want to share, which will project exactly that kind of sense. And you will get a sense of it by the engagement you get and the shares which follow.
Great answer. Yeah. Yeah. Social media in general is not easy. So yeah, like any, whether it be personal or for your brand, it does take a lot of work. So thanks for answering those questions. We're going to switch tones a little, so get out of the business and brand talk. And we have a couple of questions from our audience relating to their personal collections. So Mary asks, what is the best way to clean up your collections? So maybe you made a couple mistakes. Do you recommend deleting collections that you feel like you've messed up and refocusing or rebuilding? Have you experienced that before? What would you recommend to her?
Yeah, I've definitely gone through and pruned a collection or two in my day. I started when collections launched, I went all out. I created a collection for every interest remotely that I was remotely passionate about, and realized I couldn't really this wasn't sustainable. It wasn't scalable. And so regarding how do I go through, there is a process, a tactical process that you can sort of take. Make sure that you move a post item that you do want to save or transfer to another collection through the overflow menu on top right-hand corner of the specific post. So you have to remove from collection and then therein do the same action and add from the menu to a new collection. Hopefully you didn't mess up that bad to have to move every single post. If you have to move every single post, just rename the collection and change the cover image. That might be faster. But generally, in my experience, when that has happened, it's just a collection that is just not getting a lot of traction, or a collection that I was briefly passionate about something and I'm no longer passionate about it, or it's just a dud. It was a terrible idea, and I want to sort of get rid of it. So that's easy to try to figure out. Definitely, sort of move things around, and don't be afraid to delete stuff. Just nuke it from orbit, as I say, if it doesn't work, and focus on what works.
Okay. Well, it's what Noble said. It depends on the mistake. If it's something which you think, within a collection doesn't work because you're getting better at it and your older stuff doesn't, well, you may want to leave it there as progression, perhaps, if it's not too bad. But if you really feel very strongly against it, by all means, do delete it. So it's not a problem. Do remember that everything which we do in the online space is intentional. So think very carefully about what you're doing, how you're putting it together, how it's going to affect your audience, what impact it will have, and how you're going to achieve that impact, and go from there.
Awesome. Thanks for that. Yeah, that's, I think, the one great thing about the digital space is that it's fluid also. You can go back and fix your mistakes, and it's not so unforgiving. We have more questions. So from Zara, she asks, David, could you address collections with many followers but not much engagement?
Yes. Okay, that's a good question, because what happens if you have a lot of followers but your engagement is low? Well, it really depends on the nature of the collection. If the collection, for instance, I follow neuroscience, right? And a lot of people don't feel qualified to respond to it. so they don't. But a lot of people do follow it and they consume the content. So it really depends on what you're actually sharing. If you're sharing a collection which is lighthearted and you think that a lot of people would engage with the fun element, and they don't, and there's, the engagement is very low, you don't get a lot of reshares, a lot of +1s and 0 comments, then perhaps there's something wrong, within inverted commas, with that collection in terms of how it connects with its audience. If it's a more sort of utility-driven collection in terms of, you're talking about a technical subject and you're an expert in it, it depends on how you frame it. If you make it accessible, invite comment, then you should get engagement. If you don't make it accessible and you're simply sharing it to inform people, then I think it's perfectly fine that you will get viewership, but not a lot of engagement, because there are certain perceptual barriers which the audience can't easily overcome.
Noble, you have any 2 cents to add to that?
No, this is above my pay grade. I think I think David addressed that pretty well, and I actually learned something. So that's awesome.
So we have one last question, and from the audience, and then I have a final question for you, and then we'll wrap up the session. But the last audience question is from Nina, and again, ask David. Are there users that can never ever get comfortable with collections?
Well, that's like saying, is any of us comfortable living in a public space? Essentially, that's what it is. Every time we post something, we inadvertently signal a little bit of our interest, a little bit of who we are, what we say, how we frame it, the heading we choose, and then how we engage and interact with the people who engage and interact with it reveals a little bit of our personality. We're here by design, so being shy and retiring perhaps is not an option. I understand that it's a skill, that projecting is a skill and not everybody has, but we can all acquire it. And one thing about the digital space is that as it allows us to connect with people, we're connecting with just that, people. We are all gradually getting better at what we do. We learn more, we become more confident, and it's a shared journey. So we may start off feeling shy and retiring perhaps, and we develop and change as we meet more people and our confidence grows and our skill level grows.
What was the question again?
Are there some people who will never ever get comfortable with using collections? Interesting question.
I imagine so, right? It all depends on, from my view, in my view, it all depends on how you use social media too, right? I mean, if you want to say, so when collections were launched, they did one thing that I found very interesting, that a feature that I've never used. They made collections private, also made collections public. I would imagine one scenario where a person might feel uncomfortable using collections, at least from the outside looking in, is that all the collections they may see are public. And so they might assume that if they use the collection, that might also be public. But just general knowledge, I found out that you could make a private collection as well. I'm pretty sure it's still the case. And so, yeah, sure, there's definitely going to be people that may not find value in using collections. They may have other tools that they find a little bit more effective at collections. Or the content that they like to share isn't conducive to be distributed through a curated medium like collections. So yeah, it's definitely an interesting question. I've never met, I mean, every single person that I've met loves collections. You know, nobody loves collections more than me. I'm just kidding. Yeah, that's pretty much all I have for that.
So going off of that, this is my last question to both of you. 30-second overview of why do you use collections? Why do you use Google Plus? You know, you have a lot of options out there, not just as a plug for Google Plus, but also out of curiosity, like how does Google Plus help you in your social strategy?
Okay, that's a great question. Because of what I do in terms of writing books in the digital space and also advising companies in digital space, by design, I'm almost everywhere. Also by design, I'm at my most authentic and at my most engaging within Google Plus, because I tend to meet real people here, and I've actually made real friends, and I've learned a lot of things. And it's changed my own frame of reference in terms of how I think about a multitude of things. So it helped me grow. It helped me become better. And a better version of myself, well, no other social network has ever helped me do that. So that's why I'm so passionate about it.
To unpack that question, I think from my standpoint, I use collections mostly because it helps me do two things. It helps me curate my passions and my ideas and thoughts, right? So three separate things. Something that I'm super passionate about that, you know, like Legos from Miss Tyne, I'll definitely, you know, look to a collection or two outward. And then I also, from a consumption standpoint, and then from a creation standpoint, I also want to be able to sort of capture my thoughts around a specific topic. So that's the first thing that that comes to mind as far as the utility of why I keep using it. And then the second thing is the audience, right? So I have stuck around Google Plus. It's almost, what is it, 5 years to the day? Wait, no, it's been more than that. Since when Google Plus launched on my birthday, June 28th. Just remember that.
Which is tomorrow.
Which is tomorrow. Definitely remember that date. And I've just grown to appreciate the type of content that the people who are still on Google Plus that I follow rapidly and have in my different circles post. And I also appreciate that there's an audience that appreciates my content enough to give it a +1 or tell me that I'm posting too much, which never happens. So those are the two main places. A way to sort of curate the things in my head and the things that I love to see, and you know, the interaction that sort of circles that universe.
So with that, I want to wrap up our panel for tonight. I want to give a big thank you again to Noble and David. You guys are really outstanding, and such a treat for me to work with you both. Last final plug for the collections community. So if you have not visited or checked it out, please do. You can find us on Google Plus if you search collections community for more great 101 content, tips and tricks from our panelists. We also have previous editions of this panel that you can go and check out, and more collections resources. And lastly, if you're interested in doing what Noble and David do, you can also join the Create program. So that is our program for the most involved and expert creators on our website, creators and curators on Google+. So if you're interested, there will be more information in the collections community as well. Yeah, thank you so much for joining us tonight. Have a great evening. Bye.
Thank you. Take care. Bye-bye.